Something strange is happening inside Formula One right now. Not because of a crash, not because of a scandal, not even because of Red Bull, but because the people who are supposed to drive the future of this sport suddenly do not trust it anymore. And when Formula One drivers start publicly turning against a brand new era before it even arrives, that is usually a very bad sign. Because this is not normal frustration. This feels different. Over the last few weeks, more and more drivers have started criticizing Formula One's upcoming 2026 regulations, quietly at first, then publicly, then aggressively. Max Verstappen compared parts of the new direction to Mario Kart. Lando Norris questioned whether the racing could start feeling artificial. George Russell admitted drivers still have major concerns behind the scenes. And suddenly fans started asking the same question: what exactly is going on with the future of Formula One? Because the 2026 cars were supposed to represent everything F1 wanted to become: cleaner, smarter, more sustainable, more advanced. That was the vision. New engine rules, heavy electrical deployment, active aerodynamics, massive manufacturer investment, Audi entering the sport, Honda staying involved. Formula One presenting itself as the future of global motorsport. But now there's a growing fear inside the paddock that FIA may have pushed things too far. And the scary part is that drivers almost never criticize future regulations this openly unless something behind the scenes already feels wrong, especially drivers like Verstappen, because Max usually does not complain unless he genuinely believes the sport is heading in a dangerous direction. And when the most dominant driver of this era starts sounding frustrated before the cars even hit the track, people listen, especially fans, especially teams, especially FIA, because underneath all the futuristic marketing and polished presentations, there's now a growing belief that Formula the First of maybe creating a racing problem nobody fully knows how to fix yet. And the deeper you look into the 2026 regulations, the more uncomfortable this situation starts to feel. The biggest concern is not speed, it is how the racing itself could fundamentally change. The new regulations rely heavily on battery deployment and energy management, much more than current Formula One cars, which sounds great on paper, until drivers started realizing what that could actually mean during races. Less freedom to push, more lifting and coasting, more energy saving, more artificial overtaking patterns. In other words, drivers are worried Formula One could slowly stop feeling like Formula One. And once fans heard that, the entire conversation changed. Because now this is no longer just a technical debate. Now it feels emotional. Now it feels political. Now it feels like a fight over what Formula One is supposed to be. And honestly, that is why this story suddenly exploded online, because fans can tolerate complicated regulations. What they cannot tolerate is the feeling that the sport itself is losing its identity. And that fear is spreading fast, especially after multiple drivers started saying almost the exact same thing that usually does not happen by accident. If you're enjoying this video so far, hit subscribe, because the next few years in Formula One could become one of the most controversial eras this sport has seen in a very long time. And the strangest part is that this may only be the beginning. At first, a lot of people inside Formula One tried to downplay the concerns. They called it normal resistance, drivers hate change. Fans always panic, teams complain every single time regulations shift. That was the narrative until more details started leaking out. Because the deeper teams went into the simulations, the more nervous people became. And suddenly, FEA found itself in a very uncomfortable position. The rules were supposed to be stable by now. Instead, they keep changing, quietly, repeatedly, almost nervously. And that is where this entire situation starts becoming much more serious. Because Formula One teams do not build cars overnight. These projects are developed years in advance. Every aerodynamic concept, every cooling system, every energy deployment strategy, everything depends on stable regulations. But multiple reports now suggest teams are still trying to understand whether the racing product itself will actually work properly. That is alarming, especially for manufacturers spending hundreds of millions of dollars entering this new era. Audi's coming into Formula One because of these regulations. Honda committed because of these regulations. Entire long-term projects are built around FIA getting this right. And yet behind the scenes, the governing body keeps adjusting key details. Which raises a dangerous question. If everything is under control, why do the rules keep changing? That question is becoming impossible to ignore, because every new adjustment creates more uncertainty. And every uncertainty creates more tension between FIA teams and drivers. Then things got even worse. Drivers started openly talking about artificial racing, That phrase changed everything because Formula One fans can accept slower cars. They can accept new technology. They can even accept controversial regulations. But the moment people think the racing itself is becoming fake, the emotional reaction becomes explosive. And that fear is spreading fast. The biggest issue is energy deployment. Under the 2026 rules, battery management becomes massively important during races. Drivers are worried they may spend entire laps managing systems instead of attacking. That overtakes could become scripted by battery levels. That wheel to wheel battles could slowly disappear. And honestly, that sounds terrifying for a sport built on raw competition, especially when Formula One is more popular than ever in America. Because the new audience that arrived through Drive to Survive did not fall in love with battery calculations. They fell in love with chaos, aggression, pressure, rivalries, emotion. Now imagine if Formula One accidentally removes some of that in pursuit of efficiency. That is the nightmare scenario drivers are quietly hinting at. And maybe the most revealing part is who keeps speaking up. Max Verstappen, because Max is not fighting for attention anymore. He already dominates the sport, he already has championships, he already has influence. So when someone like Verstappen repeatedly sounds frustrated, fans immediately assume there's a deeper issue hiding underneath the surface. And that creates another problem for FIA perception. Because once fans start believing the future of Formula One looks artificial, it becomes incredibly difficult to control the narrative again, especially online, especially on social media, especially when every new interview creates even more concern. Some fans now believe FIA is prioritizing sustainability over racing quality. Others think the drivers are overreacting and resisting progress. And honestly, that debate is becoming one of the biggest civil wars in modern Formula One fandom. So now the sport finds itself trapped between two terrifying possibilities. Either the drivers are exaggerating, or Formula One is heading toward a future its own stars no longer fully believe in. And if that second possibility is true, then this situation is much bigger than a simple regulation controversy, because it could redefine what Formula One becomes for the next decade. But the most worrying part is that some people inside the paddock believe the real problems have not even started yet. And once the actual racing begins, FIA may discover something it cannot easily reverse. Let me know in the comments. Do you think drivers are overreacting to the 2026 regulations? Or do you think Formula One is genuinely risking the future of the sport trying to chase this new direction? Because the next part of this story gets even more uncomfortable. And this is where the situation becomes genuinely dangerous for Formula One. Because once the conversations moved beyond drivers, the fans started noticing something else. The sport itself feels nervous. FEA keeps reassuring everyone that the 2026 era will create better racing, smarter racing, more sustainable racing, more innovative racing, but the confidence behind those statements suddenly feels weaker than before. And that matters because Formula One has survived controversial eras in the past. It survived domination, political wars, team scandals, even races fans hated. But Formula One only works when people still believe the sport understands what makes it special. That is the real risk here, not slower lap times, not battery deployment, trust. Because once fans start believing Formula One is becoming artificial, every awkward overtake and every strange race instantly reinforces that fear. And once that narrative spreads online, it becomes almost impossible to stop. Especially in the modern social media era, a single boring race weekend could trigger weeks of backlash. A failed overtake system could become a viral disaster overnight. And if drivers themselves keep criticizing the product publicly, the damage becomes even worse. Because fans trust drivers more than FIA, that is the uncomfortable reality. And maybe that explains why this entire situation suddenly feels so tense behind the scenes. Because Formula One knows the stakes are enormous. The 2026 regulations are not just another update. They're supposed to define the next generation of the sport. New manufacturers, new audiences, new technology, new commercial growth. Everything is connected to this era succeeding, which means FIA cannot really afford failure. But what if the drivers are right? What if the racing actually becomes less aggressive? What if energy management starts controlling battles too heavily? What if Formula One accidentally creates cars that are technically impressive, but emotionally empty? That is the fear sitting underneath this entire controversy. And honestly, that fear may be exactly why so many drivers suddenly sound uncomfortable talking about the future. Because deep down, Formula One has always been emotional before it was technical. People fell in love with screaming engines, desperate overtakes, risk, chaos, pressure, not efficiency targets. And now the sport is trying to balance both worlds at the same time. That might work perfectly. Or it could create one of the biggest identity crises Formula One has faced in decades. And maybe that is why the reaction from fans has become so emotional, because this no longer feels like a normal regulation change. It feels like Formula One standing at a crossroads. One direction leads toward a smarter and more sustainable future. The other risks losing some of the raw emotion that made millions of people fall in love with the sport in the first place. And right now, nobody truly knows which direction Formula One is heading toward. Not the fans, not the teams, maybe not even FIA itself. That uncertainty is exactly why this story keeps growing bigger every single week. Because if the concerns from Verstappen, Norris, and other drivers turn out to be correct, the consequences could shape Formula One for years. And if FIA fixes the problems before 2026 arrives, this entire era could still become revolutionary in the best possible way. But until the cars finally hit the track, the fear is going to remain. And honestly, that fear may already be changing Formula One itself. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe because the next 2 years could completely redefine the future of Formula One. And something tells me this controversy is only getting started.